Welcome to Do What Matters Most. This is episode 17 in the series, 21st-Century Children. We've waited too long to find and apply effective ways of building our children's confidence and self-esteem. In this episode, learn the 3 sources of these positive qualities and listen to how families either promote or fail to promote these successful outcomes that help children avoid depression and anxiety.
Recently, I read a headline in the local newspaper, the Deseret News, and it said therapist shortage. And I thought, as long as I have lived, I would have never anticipated that. But in the recent years, the last 4 or 5 years, in fact, there has been such an increase in need or demand for therapists and good therapists in relation to our depression and anxiety, and especially for that of our children, that a lot of the professionals that I know, including many that I have trained, are booked out for several months in advance. And it's quite interesting to me because here we are standing around waiting for all of these things to happen to us, just living life as you know. And then it happens, and then we think, oh, well, we're in this circumstance, what do we do? Well, because there didn't appear to be a need, then there was no creation of some sort of concept across our culture, even the small cultures where I live and the cultures in the United States. We don't have the idea that we should be given great emphasis on promoting the mental health of our children and what to do to make it possible for them to survive and thrive and succeed and so on. And so that is like a empty category for folklore for a lot of parents, because now, like years ago, and for all these years, we have our children and we start rearing them and life goes on and we just sort of start school, we go through the mile markers and everything seems to be okay, and then all of a sudden they are in such distress that we think, wow, how did this happen? Well, I am proposing that what we need to do is to start thinking about new ways to look at mental and emotional health and well-being and new applications or practices for our families so that we can insert them into ongoing parental systems of discipline or education or family relationships so that they have greater impact and our children are more invulnerable to the types of challenges they are currently facing. So in light of that, I am starting a 2-part series on social confidence and self-esteem. And the reason for that is that if you can help your children and knew how to help them develop confidence, and you didn't think it was just sort of inherited, or you helped them develop self-esteem and you knew skills in that process, then it's likely that your children would be less vulnerable to the negative aspects which are creating so much news nowadays. So in part 1, I'm going to address some background questions having to do with the sources of social confidence and self-esteem, and the idea of using self-esteem as a measure for how we think about ourselves, and also the idea that language matters a lot, and we need to pay attention to the words we use and how we communicate. And then lastly, one of the biggest challenges that parents face is gauging how to help children develop the right combination of conditions that enable confidence to emerge and self-esteem. So let's start with the idea that social confidence and self-esteem has some sources, that is, places in their emotional and psychological life where these conditions exist that allow us to use in order to promote confidence and positive self-esteem. The sources for social confidence, and I'm going to take just a minute and define them. Social confidence is a combination of autonomy, which means a sense of responsibility in oneself, and a combination of that and positive emotional connections. Self-esteem, as I just mentioned briefly, is the idea of measuring ourselves and learning to do that accurately. Now imagine a child who attends small and large social situations with his or her parents and then talks over the experiences with parents afterward. What's going on is sort of a dialogue with parents about the meaning of social behavior, cultural conditions, traditions, language, and etc. Now contrast that with a child that has limited exposure to social situations and or conversations with parents. How might these two children differ? In this basic model, if parents wanted to, what could they point out? What could they suggest, both before going into some social experience and afterwards, on the ride home, for example? So the point I'm making and trying to emphasize is that there are numerous opportunities between parents and children who share social situations where we miss opportunities to educate and inform children and help them be successful. Now, research regarding social confidence and self-esteem clearly, I repeat clearly, indicates there are three sources of children's experience that provide the foundation that we're seeking. One is achievement, which usually means that children gradually become more organized, have their own talents and abilities, find some way to develop them and express them, and find some success from their diligence, and they demonstrate that they can learn. Achievement is one of the three core areas for confidence and self-esteem. Number two is an adequate moral education, where children have internalized principles of conduct. That is, instead of just hearing people tell them what to do and what the rules are, they think about it, gain experiences with them. The parents talk them over, help them examine their feelings and their thoughts. And because children then develop things or ideas within themselves, this notion of a moral education means that they learn and demonstrate self-regulation combined with awareness of other people. And this awareness is related to what helps or harms themselves or others. Think about that just for a minute. So moral education means I've got to learn to regulate myself, and I also have to regulate myself based on what I know helps or harms me or others. It's actually a marvelous idea that helps us develop a whole series of concepts about what children learn or don't learn, or what their actions mean or don't mean, in terms of helping you evaluate or measure your children's behavior. The third source is fairly extensive and positive social involvements and interactions. In shorthand, this means successful relationships. And these include belonging experiences, including others, showing good friendship and relationship skills, being able to adapt and present communication, perceptual, that is, interpreting people, and emotional behavior successfully in many different social settings. Every parent will ask a child, what did you think? And they'll judge this child, and the parents will say, hold it, let's go back and review that, or why do you think that? That process of helping children measure, helping children experience, and so on, helps them see that the ability to develop their social skills is an important value and priority. So just to review, three sources: achievement, an adequate moral education, and fairly extensive and positive social involvements and interactions, friendships, good relationships. Now let's move on. Confidence and self-esteem also come from how we measure ourselves. Now this is an interesting idea, because when you measure yourselves, there are two parts of that, and most people don't know that. The first part is called I am. Well, I am good, I am happy, I am cheerful, I am pleasant. And then we also measure ourselves in terms of how we think others measure us, like what do they think of me, while gaining experience in these three principal sources. So here's what happens. A child goes out into the world and he thinks, well, who am I and what am I like? And he will develop, or she will develop, some basic ideas that I'm talkative or not talkative, I'm happy or not happy, and so on. And all of these ideas fit into a category of what I am. And it should go without saying that the more positive I ams that a child thinks that are realistic and positive are better suited to self-esteem and confidence than a whole lot of negatives. I am not handsome, I am not cute, I am not smart, and all of these other kinds of things. So it isn't that children don't develop both I am nots and I ams. Confidence and self-esteem depend on children to realistically identify what I am. And then we want them to also identify correctly, what do other people think of me? Now, because our brains are organized for it, we think at multiple levels at the same time or close to the same time. We also link or connect our emotions with our thoughts and experience through what is called the law of association. These are then organized into 3 levels of thinking, feeling. The first level is what we think about of many different subjects. What I think about myself, what I think about you, what I think about my family, what I think about my work. The second level is called meta thoughts, or thoughts about the first level. So they're thinking about our thoughts. The third is how we measure then and what we think and feel about ourselves. Now, over time, separate thoughts we think about ourselves and the accompanying emotions are collected into groups called concepts. And these become generalized ways of viewing our world, other people, and ourselves. 2 of these are known as social confidence and self-esteem. Now, children also inherit different levels of emotional intensity regarding anxiety and many other positive feelings. Children who inherit more anxiety or learn it as a function of their unhappy or traumatic experience have more difficulty learning to feel confident and positive. Children who feel less anxiety but more positive feelings, therefore, are likely to have more ability to naturally move into confidence and self-esteem. Now, how children are taught to view and manage their anxieties and fears is central. So, for example, in the world in which we live, and a child says, well, I'm afraid, and then we say to them, well, okay, go lie down, or okay, you don't have to do anything. Sometimes that's appropriate, most of the time not. For example, fears and anxieties exist for most of us, but can and should be, number 1, understood. Tell me about them. Help me understand what you're feeling. Accepted. I get that, boy. I can see why that's happening. And faced, rather than motivate withdrawal and inaction. I remember one time when one of my grandchildren was having a difficulty time, and so he went to the school counselor and said he was anxious, and the school counselor said, well, if you're anxious, then don't come to school. That is not an alternative, except in extreme cases. And if we're not careful, we can actually horribilize a child's anxiety and make it far worse by our efforts to try to help solve it. Here's the next point I would like to make. Positive and negative emotions are generated by children themselves and from their immediate social and family experience. That is, parental relationships, siblings, social anger, anxiety, and control versus parental calmness, affection, empathy, and warmth. So the family environment of emotions for children matter a great deal. So what's going on in your family? Is it more positive than negative, and is it positive a high percent of the time? You should know that in American families, the criticism or emphasis on negative is often much more, in fact, 10 times more than something that's positive and constructive. I often wonder how a child can survive with confidence and self-esteem if they're around the negative emphasis or frustration that they often face in their families. Point 3, it is often not the experience itself that children have that determines what children think about themselves. Now go with me just for a minute. A child will go out and have some event happen with friends or with family or at school. Okay, and so I'm trying to help you understand that it's not the experience itself, so we could understand it. It's the way they interpret their experience that matters most. So, for instance, one of my boys, very young, came and sat down and wanted to talk to me, and he was discouraged. And finally, I got out of him what he wanted to talk about, and he said, Dad, some kid at school said that I have a big bum. And while that's pretty discouraging for somebody that age, I said, well, let's take a look. And so he stood up and I looked and I said, well, it's not really big, but it's sort of big. But keep in mind that the reason it's big is you have very powerful jumping muscles. Well, jumping muscles now makes a large bum for a developmental child much, much better. Giving children ideas about themselves need to be realistic. And one of the essential points is that giving them a view of only positive about themselves tend to be a mistake. For the last 10 years, we've had some people believe that praise, a steady diet of praise, a steady diet of everything is fine and wonderful, is the best way to produce confidence and self-esteem. It's not. It's a good way to create narcissists. And then we need to give our children a realistic view of themselves, including successes and failures, and that combination works better. So, for example, if a child made a mistake, we would say, well, this mistake happened. Here's what you actually did. But the question for you, son or daughter, is, can you learn from this? See, or does the mistake mean that you're weak or bad? Help them interpret it in a way that is realistic, but also gives them something to hope for. Point 4, those who develop a sense of humor and use it are better able to laugh at themselves, laugh with others, and find enjoyment in several different personal and social situations. If you're not helping your children develop a positive sense of humor, would you please start? And would you please tell them all different kinds of jokes and have them tell you, and then different kinds of humor, wry humor, all sorts of humor about things that don't harm people. Well, the next and the last point has to do with language. The children hear from others. And the reason why it's important is that language that children hear from others is often what children learn and use to think about themselves. Now, all humans think with words and believe that our words represent reality. I'm just describing things as they actually are. The children who more often hear and use words that refer to their positive inner qualities, you're kind or thoughtful, are more likely to feel confident and self-esteem than children who hear words about their external parts of their life. You look handsome, you can do this really well. Or they use negative words about themselves and do not hear or use words about their positive inner qualities. So here's what you do. Learn and use a vocabulary called induction communication, which refers to the feelings and inner qualities that children have. This creates the reality for children that they exist, they are noticed, they are understood, and they are better able to understand their own and others' motives, intentions, and purposes. The second point having to do with language is about praise and compliments that refer to outer qualities, but are not matched by actual performance or achievement, don't connect themselves to the inner qualities. That is, you could tell your child that he's really smart at math, and he doesn't ever get it, and he's not smart at math, so then you're wasting your time. Excessive praise or whitewashing, that is denying children's culpabilities, often creates something negative, and I said narcissism, rather than actual confidence and self-esteem. Point 3 with language. Children wish to know and understand realistic truths about themselves, even when it's not positive, especially if it's accompanied by understanding and hope. Behavioral data, that is how children act, is crucial in establishing truths rather than just words. The more self-knowledge children possess when true, and they find an application of it, the more likely they will be confident and feel self-esteem. Lastly, children who are confident and have social confidence in particular have opportunities to practice, and they practice social skills, and they're taught social skills, and they learn specific statements for certain situations. They also have learned and use faith statements than fear statements. Children who receive more encouragement than criticism are around optimism instead of anxiety, and they are usually more confident. Well, what do you do as parents? Learn, use, and teach specific statements for specific situations that children can think and speak to or combat their fears. An example of that. See, in our language, we have two levels of language, one for really respected formal situations and others for close friends. And so you could teach children the difference between words for those situations so that they don't find a respected person and call him Bud or how's it going, lady, or something like that. Now, the point of all this is so that we can begin a proactive, affirmative approach to helping children develop confidence instead of just sort of allow it to occur random. We also want them to develop positive self-esteem. And the reason for this is self-esteem is made up of the positive feelings that we feel about ourselves and that we're willing to use to measure ourselves. There are a lot of correlations between a self-esteem and the idea of success socially and the idea with self-comfort with one's own life.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Do What Matters Most, which is sponsored by firstanswers.com, where you can find new tools for families and parents of 21st century kids with a focus on emotional self-reliance. Visit firstanswers.com to sign up for a free newsletter. Find Do What Matters Most on Facebook and our website, mattersmostmedia.org, where you can ask Dr. Scoresby your own questions. Remember to subscribe to stay up to date with new episodes. Give us a rating and write a review on the podcast app or Google Podcasts and let us know what you think about Do What Matters Most.